pocket monsters, Pokemon. Or as your parents probably call them, Digimon. Why yes, father, that is Pikachu. What gave it away? As a foreword, out of all of the videos I've made, Elon Musk, NFTs, AI, Disney, and the general ever-present persecution of minorities, this is the one I expect to receive the most immediate resistance from. Nintendo games, and in specific Pokemon, inspires a type of loyalty that kings had to defeat an entire country in war just to receive. This is evident if you've interacted with anything within the sphere of Nintendo, especially things like emulation or patents, where people fervently rally behind a monolithic bully with dubious legal precedents strong-arming the world into their warped view in direct contention with their own customers' best interests. So before anyone gets upset, I will be saying something nice about the game. I promise. I'm not just being mean. I'll also be saying something nice about Surfshark VPN, today's sponsor. Are you tired of region-locked services like KO giving you inferior service for more money? Well, you've actually met me at a very American time in my life. Or maybe not. Why is Memento only on Korean Netflix? And does any of that matter if you can still watch it? Paranoid about service providers peeking in. You've actually never met me before. You're going crazy. I wasn't even here. With over 4,500 servers in 100 countries, at the press of a button you can obfuscate your network traffic, increasing your security on public networks, and deny anyone's ability to lock content because of where you live. Surfshark's 24/7 customer service and the refusal to record users' logs means that you can be confident that your right to anonymity is constantly maintained and protected. With additional benefits like alternative ID, dedicated IP, and unlimited devices, you can make sure that nothing you do slips through the cracks. Go to surfshark.com/KappaVPN or use code KappaVPN at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Okay, so despite it seeming that way, most people alive probably haven't played a Pokemon game in a while. Everyone's played it, and are kind of wondering, what's going on? Our story begins in 1990. I'm kidding. None of this matters. Ignore it. The story actually begins with the series transitioning from the underpowered hardware of the DS family to the, frankly, still underpowered hardware of the Switch, but this one can run Just Dance, so. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were released in 2018, and while having faults, skated by relatively unharmed, as they were transparently a spin-off game to introduce Pokemon Go players into the series. Sword and Shield released almost exactly a year later and was the first original mainline game on the system, and it was not well received. Most critiques were centered around the lack of content and poor technical performance, both of which arose from the increased workload jumping from low quality to high quality 3D models, along with the learning curve of somehow getting it to run on what is essentially a smart TV. A particular sticking point for many fans was the removal of several Pokemon from previous generations, as up until this point, there were robust systems to carry forward the previous generations, whether that be Pokemon Bank, Home, or just dropping it in a bucket with a perfect spiral. During a 2019 E3 livestream, it was announced that the game would exclude just more than half of all existing Pokemon in a scandal that came to be known as Dexit. Even with the expansion pass bumping up the number a year later, for many, the lack of Pokemon, relatively underwhelming story, and lack of a decent post-game were enough to find their experience middling, if not disappointing. According to the game's director, because of moving from lower quality to higher quality 3D assets that needed to be remade from the 3DS games, there just weren't enough resources to remake every Pokemon. And that makes sense. 3D models are a lot more difficult to work with than 2D sprites and have unique rigs for each Pokemon. On the one hand, it would have been nice to see these problems in advance, so that the finished product was more complete. On the other hand, now that the problem is obvious and proven to be true, it is much easier to avoid. And on the other third hand, they never fixed it. Scarlet and Violet were the next mainline Pokemon games, and were even worse. Every problem that plagued Sword and Shield had returned and was tangibly worse, probably because they decided to make the scope considerably bigger. What people got was so half-baked in every aspect that the game was obviously running at a horrific quality and noticeably lagging in the trailer, which is somehow better than the game, that on launch had cutscenes where every time the angle changed, something was wrong. I only noticed this because I thought I was going crazy. The reviews for those games ended up being eerily prescient, as the points made against them are the same ones I'll be making against this game several years later. We're here, in the present day. ZA Legends Pokemon. It's not very good. I feel I should point out, while this video is trying to be as objective as possible while still being my own experience, that may have no effect on your personal enjoyment of the game, and if that is the case, then that's excellent. Having fun is the purpose of video games and many types of petty crime. On the other hand, finding enjoyment in something doesn't absolve it of standards held by its peers, and wanting it to meet an objective quality in its technical aspects isn't being pedantic and should not be misconstrued as a personal attack on you. Enjoying something that has flaws is okay. Trust me, I know what it feels like, dude. I should start with the most obvious point, being the presentation. Any train of thought is gonna pass this station. It is ugly. It's ugly in the context of its release year of Switch games, and in my opinion, the Pokemon series itself. Despite what some people claim, this game was originally designed for the Switch 1. The Switch 2 version features better textures, frame rate, and I think low distances, which is in line with every other Switch 2 upgrade package to begin with. And before someone says it, you can tell the difference between 30 and 60 frames a second, especially when playing, because doubling the frame rate halves the input latency, creating a smoother experience. Not every game needs to be 4K 120, and not every car needs to hit 200 kilometers an hour, but I would demand that all of them be able to reach the speed limit. The Switch isn't very powerful, even when it came out. The Smart TV comment wasn't a joke. It literally shares a processor with the Nvidia Shield, creating a very fun pastime looking up games that should not have been ported to the Switch. Hogwarts Legacy couldn't run on like medium spec computers, so obviously let's release it on a smartwatch. This creates a clear incentive to focus more on a strong art style and ambience, because why strive for realism when it's a battle you are going to lose by downsizing everything just to run on the Switch to begin with? Dredge fits this mold perfectly, focusing on colors and lighting on top of simplistic textures, so it's no surprise that aside from a 30 FPS cap, it is still the full experience with the same textures and models, just on the Switch. Pokemon games have been getting more out of less for decades, especially with their characters, and Legends ZA continues the trend. They are designed extremely well, paired with strong modeling and animation work. They're leaving personality behind on the ground they tread, with the Megastone cutscenes being a particular highlight that many people have latched onto. This is heightened by the battle music and the soundtrack as a whole being a standout positive. Bordering on perfect, there is not a single piece close to mediocre across a multi-hour soundtrack. The worst thing that I can say about it is some of the songs got repetitive, but that's a problem with the gameplay associated with them. The songs are amazing. When paired together, they make extremely strong moments and create emotions out of thin air. Battling a new character was always interesting because of this. The downside to well-animated and modeled characters is that they exist in a world that looks nothing like them and is visibly fraying at the seams. Witnessing the platonic ideal of a 3D Pikachu standing next to an unaltered real picture of a brick wall gave me moments of whiplash I never got used to. When you get in the zone of watching cartoon people using cartoon Pokemon, then snapping back to the open world or catching a glimpse of a concerningly realistic croissant, I can't help but feel like it was done this way because they just ran out of time. There are multiple areas and parts of the game where it feels like the assets were placeholders that just accidentally got shipped. The interior scenes are a pretty clear step up from the rest of the city. It's the most detailed the game gets, the most ambience it can manage, and the most 3D objects in one place, so like, cherish them. I want to cut something off at the pass. A sentiment among, I hope, a small sect of people that defend this game is that the underwhelming graphics don't matter, and to go a step further, it's snobbish and fake to point it out. A phrase I've seen frequently follows the lines of, I don't play video games to look at walls, I just want them to be fun. And to be fair, I agree. But everyone does. That's kind of the problem. We all agree with it until it crosses below our minimum threshold. The implicit barrier that we don't say, that we're confident will never be reached. I have never cared about windows while playing Pokemon, but they've never looked bad enough that I would notice. Some people are saying the flat textures and painted on doors don't matter to the experience, but would all of those people be okay replacing them with sheer-faced grey walls? Worse quality windows? What about one gigantic window? If texturing, lighting, art direction, and modeling didn't affect the enjoyment, then they wouldn't spend money doing it. My main point is, I think it's weird to set the standards so far below the rest of the industry, below the rest of the series, and magnitudes worse than what the game is currently reaching. Why would you outwardly broadcast that you are okay with, if not actively encouraging out of spite, that Nintendo lower their publishing standards, or that Game Freak put in less effort and have fewer employees doing more work, creating a worse version of something that you love? If I had to guess, the open sightlines and lack of system memory that is itself shared between system processors means there just aren't enough resources to load that much stuff in at once, what is required for an open world, which is used as a defense. This is the most demanding Pokemon game so far. There isn't enough processing power to make it look good. This, however, brings forth something that's kind of common in the game development industry, and particularly developing for underpowered hardware. Quite famously, Okami started development as a photorealistic aesthetic game about healing, inspired by the Resident Evil like, what would this game have possibly looked like? What were you doing? Apparently the performance of the game struggled, what a surprise. They correctly identified this, pivoted to a new aesthetic, the problem was fixed, and as a bonus, the game ended up actually being any good. Again, where was this going? It's sort of ironic as around 20 years later, a PlayStation 2 game is exactly what Legend ZA would be called. A few people take issue to that joke, and rightly so. The technical proficiency of the Switch still clears any game of that era, but the Switch 1 version of Legend ZA is not far off. It's just over twice the size of a PS2 disc, and artistically, I think the statement is kind of insulting to the PlayStation 2. Editor's note. It's actually smaller than some PS2 games, do with that what you will. Many of the realistic looking games have not aged particularly well, but there are many that have. By striving for a comic book and cartoonish style, Sly 2 Band of Thieves can create a technically lackluster experience, especially around the edges, but it's still interesting and consistent. Beyond that, there are moments where I genuinely think that there is intangible beauty to it. I honestly believe the PlayStation 2 version at 1080p looks better than Legends ZA, and I am not joking. Even Legends Arceus that itself doesn't look good, has a level of artistry that ZA doesn't reach, like colored shadows, moving clouds, a layered skybox, some genuinely beautiful lighting, and interesting horizons. So no, it's not just people complaining that the windows aren't 4K, it's that they don't even have the decency to be interesting or artistic. If the city is the reason for its sordid existence, the Switch just can't do it. There isn't a holy mandate that requires that this game exist in the exact state it does. Bethesda would have loved if the Imperial City was one seamless area, but it wouldn't work, so they didn't do it. Too large a scope in development is still a fault, either overestimating the hardware's capabilities, the workload required to deliver it, or refusing to pivot once those issues become obvious. Some players will eventually get into a groove, but those moments for me only lasted a few minutes because of a disturbing amount of frequency that the game seems to make an effort to highlight every flaw it has. I had seen comments about this before I started playing, and was under the impression that some things in the background wouldn't look great, that by looking for them, I would find them. In actual gameplay, the flat, low-quality, mismatched, stretched textures are inescapable. They frequently are in front of you, your left, your right, behind you. inside you? Small Pokemon position the camera really close to things that it shouldn't be near, and trying to sneak attack a trainer's Pokemon, doing the scaffolding challenges, or just turning a corner means you'll frequently fill half the screen with bad assets for multiple seconds. This wasn't even picking apart frames, I was timestamping them while playing. Cutscenes are worse because they end up holding position and have glaring flaws really close to where your eyes naturally look. Critics have pointed out the lack of voice acting as a disappointment, and I don't think I would have even really noticed if the game didn't constantly have close-ups of the characters' mouths. Like, they're clearly saying the words. Somebody animated those lips saying the actual words of the sentence. I would have been fine with Animal Crossing sounds. It's exacerbated by the lack of variety. There's a few interiors, and I'm tempted to call some of them almost good, but 90% of the playtime is just going to be spent in places that look so similar you can't tell any of them apart. In theory, the Wild Zone should provide a nice change, but the square footage is just too small to really make a difference. At best, it's the exact same buildings, but there's snow, or a pond, or a cemetery that feels like the house from Up. Also, I have no idea what's happening with the water, but any texture seen through even a millimeter of the liquid looks drastically worse than what it usually should. NPCs, for the most part, are better just ignored, because many of them stand completely still, miming the same vague action if you're lucky. There's a small child and a slowpoke running around, and it was so unique I stopped to watch it. Dude, Scyther has cutting animations. Was it difficult to loop them? There are even cutscenes where it felt like ghosts in the background of Haunting of Hill House. They just stare at you. Eventually, it was so distracting I stopped reading the text and noticed this person won't touch their drink. Are they spying on me? Listening to my conversations? Beyond that, just wandering around, it's pretty easy to find areas where the majority of people in frame are using the same idle animation, just standing in like a little Y pose, just hovering with one person moving around like everyone's brain turned off. What makes this weird is that there are idle animations for using their phone, for drinking coffee, and they were rare, but they looked really good, especially for background characters, which makes it confusing why most of the world is completely still and dead. Mega Rocks, items, and scaffolding provide you with something to do in the open world. How engaging any of those are varies, but from a presentation standpoint, it gives a really weird vibe. Like everything's permanently under construction and there's just a littering epidemic. The Megastones in particular are some of the only 3D geometry you'll see on walls, which again does a really good job highlighting that the walls are flat. In all honesty, some of the nicest looking parts of the city are the different obstacles. Like, they're modeled pretty well, and thankfully you can remove them with logically typed moves instead of the same hidden machines. Although sometimes, like obstacles, they restrict access to something, and other times they just don't. Navigating rooftops always felt like I was breaking the game, so I don't even know if this was intentional, which I suppose leads into the gameplay. As you may have noticed if you're still actually watching the video, the battles are in real time. This is appealing to many people, seeing as it gets closer to the anime, and at the very least expands the horizons of what a Pokemon game can be. The biggest difference in adaptation is that the abilities don't exist, and the speed stat is gone. That's probably a bigger one. It doesn't make the Pokemon move or attack any faster, it only reduces their cooldowns. And while the difference is considerable in seconds, rotating between 2 moves off cooldown isn't any different than rotating between 3 if they're 3 good moves, which there are more of now because Hydro Pump has the same inherent accuracy as Water Pulse. I feel like the low accuracy moves are designed to be slower and therefore easier to dodge, but most of the battles just end up being people standing still, so they kind of never miss. This creates an incentive towards even lackluster, big bludgeoning guys with a good selection of high damage moves, whereas glass cannons or stalling archetypes are kinda not very useful because outspeeding your opponent is no longer related to the stat or might lose abilities that define their playstyle. The actual speed of the move is determined by the move itself, which creates weird situations where strong moves are slower, but stronger Pokemon aren't. Speed matters so little that I had to look up what it did. Unknown to me, I had already spent hours playing with the slowest man alive, and I didn't even notice. Ranged attacks are also a little weird and kind of annoying to use. They automatically make your Pokemon cast it like just slightly to your right, even if the move would already hit if you cast it where they were standing. If you try and position yourself in the perfect spot so they don't have to move, they end up spending time fidgeting and turning around and then eventually waste time walking back into the fight anyway. Cast it there! You're next to him! It can create weird situations where your Pokemon faints because instead of using the move when you told it to, it just kind of like does a little shuffle and then faints by like a handful of milliseconds. Buffs and debuffs are also a mixed bag. Moves like Swords Dance become less viable because the timer counts down in real seconds that you and I use, and you can find yourself in a situation where your Pokemon couldn't pathfind their way to the ground if they were falling out of a tree. What are you guys doing? In theory, being able to spam them with little consequence means that they should actually be more enticing, but because of the way that the timer works, you don't guarantee a certain amount of moves to use it. So at the end of the day, past the early game, if you have 4 good high damaging moves, it just ends up being more efficient than only getting 1 or 2 attacks with Swords Dance. Debuffs like Confusion and Paralyze were so insignificant I had to look them up, and Sleep mostly affects Pokemon that were already cadavers. But then you have effects like Poison, which is weird because it always ticks down, even when there's no Pokemon on the field, meaning it can proc twice while you wait for the computer to just get on with it. Meanwhile, you can't even use items. As alluded to, the battle system is extremely fidgety. I mean, it's ever present. Despite letting you do it, battles should not be started on different levels or with obstacles. The reason this ends up being annoying is the lack of direct control you have over your Pokemon. You do technically control them, and the real-time system lets you do things you couldn't before, like dodge attacks. Describing it to someone makes it sound way cooler than it is. Like, you can run and dodge and your Pokemon follows you. The process of doing it is just running in circles in a way that felt so ugly and unprofessional I actually felt bad. Like I was disrespecting my opponent, who is not real. Especially when contrasting it to situations where it is required, like the Rogue Mega Evolutions. Rogue Megas are one of the draws of the game. It's an important part of the story and a large percentage of the main missions, with the draw essentially being, it's a boss fight, dude. It has phases, it has moves you need to memorize, and I feel like I'm describing water. It's a neat idea, and I really hope they revisit it, but once again, the act of doing it ends up being really monotonous and kind of boring. The intended way to do the battles, and the only real way to do any damage, is to Mega Evolve a Pokemon of your own, and obviously you're not going to have a good Mega for every fight, especially at the start, so there are mechanics in place to alleviate this. Plus, moves can use part of your Mega Bar to actually deal damage to them, despite not being a Mega Evolved Pokemon, and are integral for stunning them out of certain attacks if you don't have a Mega Evolved Pokemon on the field. The downside, I know how to do maths. Using 4 super effective, empowered moves is still not as good as just Mega Evolving any Pokemon. Even those with a type disadvantage, because you get double-digit, 20 maybe, empowered moves on top of the stat bonuses, on top of stunning them more frequently. If there were fewer of them, or some of them were optional, I don't think I would even dislike them at all, but once you've completed the tutorial, and that's being generous, they make up about half of the remaining missions before you reach the end game, and then you have to do them again. By a third of the way through, every fight, trainer, or Rogue Mega ended up the exact same way, and by the end my party was just big guys that could deal with Rogue Megas so I could hurry up and get back to the sliver of fun this story had. Catching Pokemon, in my opinion, just gets a straight upgrade, like literally just better. The mechanics around them and defeating wild Pokemon is a considerable step up. I hope this continues in every game going forward. Sneaking up to increase catch chance of turns, but now you can also defeat wild Pokemon, giving them the same chance as if they were low health, but you only get 1 chance to catch it. It was a fun mechanic with a trade-off that was still relevant, that I was thinking of, the entire game every time I did it. I just wish there was an animation for the Pokemon running away. Whatever, I'll take it. A big draw for many people is going to be the story, because it is one of the few games in the series that acts as a direct sequel to the previous installment. Pokemon Pinball. It takes place in the same area and features the same characters after a span of 5 years, giving players a chance to see more of their favorites. But even without that, no connection. The main story had some of the high points. In particular, the ending was some of the best looking and most fun experiences I had playing the game. After finishing the tutorial, the main story progresses in recurring chunks. Part of the reason I found the prevalence of Rogue Megas so grating was that the rest of the game is kind of a little repetitive. Which is annoying, because the parts that aren't repetitive are pretty engaging. All Pokemon games are built around the same structure, the systematic destruction of an ecosystem, but the change in scenery reflecting the progress you've made does a lot to help mitigate the feeling that you're just essentially bullying small children. You battle so many trainers in such rapid succession in such an unprofessional way, it ended up feeling like busy work instead of progress, which contrasts the personality-based missions, which were fun, dynamic, and actually really professional. In my opinion, the writing has always done a really good job of sprinkling in details and solidifying characters in a way that I think gets overlooked sometimes. Everyone in this game is clearly defined, including flaws that created interactions that were fun. I liked them. I didn't dislike any characters, and I hate everyone. It was, however, obvious that I was only really enjoying 1 out of every 5 missions because all of my favorites were sandwiched between running on a hamster wheel and somebody telling me to run on a hamster wheel. During those character sections, you end up battling other noteworthy characters. With your first major rank up, you battle Canary. During her mission, her grandfather. The next rank up, you battle his sister and then him. It's a fun system that makes both battles feel weighty, and it comes to a natural crescendo of the quest. It's a great system. And then it's ruined by doing it again, which can make completely new, well-written missions feel kind of repetitive. Rebattling trainers is standard practice in Pokemon games and a good way to show the development of a character or encouraging you to broaden your type coverage, including more Pokemon, showing region exclusives, just being a harder challenge. Rebattling your teammates in ZA follows this pattern as their teams change, evolve, and gain Mega Evolutions throughout the course of the story. This is the minority. The second time you fight Gwyn, she adds a Gengar. That is it. Outside of a few levels, my team was identical because I fought her 3 trainer battles ago. I fought Canary 3 separate times in the story and her team didn't change at all. These aren't optional. One of the rank up missions towards the end is a tournament rebattling the people you've just fought with the exact same teams so you beat them in the exact same way. The difference in presentation and challenge between the frequent ticket fights and the infrequent story battles created a very distinct, if intangible, difference between the two, and when the latter still contained identical battles, it felt like a waste. I trudged through the repetitive part. Why is my reward, the good parts, still, repetitive? It makes me wonder how much of the gameplay loop is to extend the time between the parts that they actually had resources to work on, and what those parts are. Because there are stretches of several hours where you will see the same randomized battles that last 10 seconds in the same locations, then rebattling the same teams, sometimes in the same arena in between Rogue Megas that have the same 10 or so functionally identical moves. For as many detractors as it has, the party EXP share is just a good change in my opinion. It cuts down on the unenjoyable parts of grinding so that you can spend more time doing what you actually want instead of depopulating a forest. Though weirdly enough, you end up doing the same amount of grinding anyway. Now it's just for tickets instead of levels, which some people might actually dislike more because now the gating is somewhat arbitrary as opposed to naturally clearing obstacles by having stronger Pokemon or using them smarter. Which isn't to say that the game lacks actual content. Completing most of the wild zones and doing some side content will probably push you over 20 hours, with the post-game probably getting that to 25. The side content could have potentially saved the experience, but it just didn't for me. Sometimes the quests would have flavor or a reward that was nice, but There's over 100 of them and the quality varies. Most air towards send my Litleo to an early grave or find my keys. That's not a joke, by the way. Side mission 106, Klefki's lost key. This woman wants you to go to several places just to scrounge for her stuff. You rack up a bounty of items without even trying. By halfway through the game, I hadn't spent any money and started ignoring people trying to give it away. Go find your own keys. What? If you do side quests for the writing and world building, there are quests that create a level of cohesion by relating to the main story. Goodbye Gengar was one of the ones that I thought was really interesting, and I kind of liked it. You can also just get ones where you're walking down an alleyway carrying rubbish, and then people look and they're like, wow, it's trubbish. And then the end of the quest, they're like, we gotta learn to cohabitate. And there's 1,000 times people have said that already. Please find my wedding band, battle me, and I'll turn the lift on. You sent out a pigeon, dude. I want to like the side quests, and there's so much potential there. But the fact that there's so many of them and the polish varies so dramatically, I feel like the developers didn't have time to just finish them. So neither should I. Which is the main takeaway. The game doesn't lack passion, new ideas, shakeups to the formula, or people that care making it. It just can't be made with this amount of developers, with this budget on this machine, and the game was doomed from the moment it was greenlit. I mentioned it before, but I find it worth repeating. Game Freak very transparently struggled with the workload when the scope of the games were significantly smaller. Development of the Pokemon series is split between Game Freak and Creatures Inc. In total, there's about 500 employees. In practice, I have literally no clue. At first, it appeared that Creatures is a studio specifically for assisting with the art of the games, but they do everything, man. Like, they have like a vague connection with the trading card game. I don't know if they employ artists or if they just contract out the work. They develop their own games because they've absorbed a company, and it's impossible to tell what percentage of the company is a CG artist, let alone which ones of those are working on the games. And yet, the mainline series, the Legends spin-off, keeps increasing in scope. They need to do more in bigger areas with more stuff. If they don't keep pushing content, how will furry artists make rent? That's the real tragedy. For some reason, there seems to be a reluctance from above to meaningfully upscale production, and a sense of apathy from Nintendo, who don't appear to be demanding an increase in quality for what is, in every meaningful way, a first-party title. According to sources who themselves have sources inside sources, it's Marinara source, the Pokemon games have ridiculously small budgets, even though the Pokemon series itself is by far the most profitable franchise of all time, dwarfing everything else, and it would be different if the games lost money to increase brand awareness, being a loss leader. It's a point that I've seen people make. The budgets are low because they don't make that much profit, and they only really exist to further the sales of merchandise or trading cards, backed up by no sources because it is anonymously posted on a TikTok comment thread. Pokemon games sell so consistently, they have multiple entries in the top 50 of all time. There is no way to lie so that they lose money on these. Game Freak, like Nintendo's own in-house developers, are one of the few places where you can just spend whatever you want on a game and it will make money. They just refuse to do it. I went into this game and this video not entirely knowing what the experience would be. Until researching, I had only played a single Pokemon game on the Switch, despite being quite attached to the series before that, and looking back, there is a lot of craft and ingenuity that I appreciate as an adult. Outside of unique battle mechanics, which itself has its warts, there isn't a single reason I would recommend this game over any other in the series. It's kind of a little depressing. After an entire life of being able to enjoy the series and still enjoying past games, bouncing off because of a lack of polish on the Switch, I blinked and the series just kind of spiraled, and I might now not ever enjoy a new Pokemon game again. Maybe things will change and someone somewhere will start a personal crusade to bring the series to a level of quality befitting its popularity, but for now, I don't know, everyone that can fire people seems pretty okay with it and just coasting by maximizing profits. And consumers seem pretty okay with it too. They're remarkably chill about this. Thanks to a gigantic install base, the recent games are some of the most popular in its history. Legends ZA is not very far behind. I feel like I should care more about this, or that the video should make a grand point. Come on guys, let's get to it. But it doesn't. Like, sure, leaving behind a series that was really important to my childhood and all that is pretty sad and a little metaphorical, but I mean, if the series goes in a downward spiral, if it bottoms out, what does that matter to me? Part of the reason this video discusses the Switch 1 version is because that's the version I could loan from a friend, and I don't own a Switch 2. For my use case, the Steam Deck is just a better experience, and I have to imagine there's not going to be any more Pokemon games coming to the Switch 1. The last bit of content this series might get on the system is the DLC, which itself is another sign of rushed development getting a price markup. It expands the roster and adds a new location like the previous expansions, but the new location is just the old location with a filter on it. And oddly enough, thanks to a nice looking skybox and the focus on surreal visuals, I think the base game looks worse in comparison. They literally sucked the color out of the world, and I like it more. The release time being so close to the launch date and the fact it was announced before the game came out means that this was finished well before Legends ZA was released, which makes it look less like additional content and more like paywalled features. It'll be the highest selling DLC of all time. It doesn't really matter how good it is, and some people just really like Hooper. In conclusion, I don't even know what the conclusion, the games are so popular, it feels like I'm watching people that really care about the series, that want it to be better, just shooting a water gun at an avalanche. I guess I just hope people broaden their horizons beyond like Pokemon games or just for like Nintendo games or Switch games, I guess. I don't know if you know this, but there are a lot of games in existence now. Many of them criminally underplayed, and despite the inclination to compare ZA to games in the series, it costs real money that can be used anywhere else for goods and services. It has to play in the park with all the other kids. The $90 Australian price tag is, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's insane. It's the reason I'm holding it to any standard whatsoever. A lot of this can be overlooked for the right amount on the side. But for the price of a AAA game, it's genuinely pathetic. And by Nintendo's practices, it's actually more likely to go up in price than down. If the game still interests you, I would recommend going through the back catalog and getting a secondhand copy of a game that you might have missed. There's another mainline game in development, and everyone's super excited how it's going to be awesome and change the series forever, but that's what everyone said about this game, and the game before that, and the game before that, and I'm gonna hold my breath. Maybe not for that long, I might die. Thank you to the fellas for doing that. There'll be a second channel video about some other stuff that I kind of just was really difficult to get into one sentence that I didn't have time for. Thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring the video. Thank you for watching. You've done all you can for me, buddy. Au revoir.